Thank you, Don.
Okay, I'm going to call to order a special meeting of the Saratoga Springs Library Board of Trustees. It's Friday, May 13th, 2022. And this is primarily about, I guess, health insurance contributions. I think, Ike, you were going to crunch some numbers and come back to us with proposal.
I did. So I hope you all got a chance to look at the memo that I sent that was in the package. You know, I had a million different spreadsheets open, but I decided in the end probably that the number that mattered most to you is what the bottom line number was. So just a little bit of background for what our current policy is. And I did add at the last minute into the packet, there's a separate link on that page on the library's web page. I'm sorry, it's green. That's what color paper was in the photocopier. What the current policy says, and it also provides a little bit of history. You'll see that we started making changes to the policy gradually to get to where we are now back in 2015. So about 7 years ago. Oh, looks like Jean is coming down. So currently our policy is that the library contributes to eligible employees health insurance at a rate of 95% of the premium based on the lowest cost plan that we offer, 95% of the premium for individual coverage, and then 80% of the premium for other tiers of coverage, which are parent and child or children, employee and partner or spouse, and family coverage. As a result this year, and that is a policy that's been phased in over the last 7 or so years. We had in the more distant past a policy of actually covering 100% of the premium, and that was at a time when we were pooled together with the school district. That's no longer the case, hasn't been the case for about 7 or 8 years. And at that point, we started then requesting, because we incurred more cost when we became, separated from the school district in terms of our health insurance, and asked employees to begin contributing, a cost sharing arrangement. And at that point, it was a fixed rate for employees hired before a certain date, and then gradually working its way up to all employees contributing at that level that I just said. So 5% for individual coverage, 20% for other tiers of coverage. And that went fully into effect with everybody effective the fiscal year that began in 2019. So it fully being in effect is a relatively recent phenomenon that also coincided with, of course, the onset of the pandemic, more or less. So that's how we got to where we are. What has happened this year with, we also provide some coverage for retirees, and retirees contribute at the level that was in effect at the time of their retirement. They're on 2 separate calendars, however, for as far as renewals go. Retirees who are 65 or older, they are on a calendar year. Active employees and retirees who are under 65, not eligible for Medicare, are on the library's fiscal calendar. So when we got the numbers for the Medicare Advantage plan that we offer, things were looking good. There was not much of a change. But in the ensuing several months, what has happened with inflation is the prices, when they were released, the cost came out significantly higher than we had anticipated them to be earlier in the year. And you'll know that that's about the same time that we were budgeting for the coming year, budgeting raises, budgeting cost of living, et cetera. And we did that based to a certain extent on inflation. In effect, at that point, what's happened now is that inflation is significantly higher now, these many months later, than it was at that point. So that's a little bit of background. When we got the figures for renewing the plans, what has happened is that the most employees are enrolled in the lowest cost plan that we offer, which is what we base our contribution on. As it turns out, that plan this year is no longer our lowest cost, and also it has experienced the greatest increase year over year in the cost of the premiums. So there is an option. So if we stick with the plan now, employees are going to generally experience an increase that could be pretty significant, regardless of what decision is made here today. If we stick with our policy as it is currently written, the people who are currently enrolled in that plan, if they stick with that plan, will experience the largest increase of all. So they, chose the least expensive plan, likely because it was the least expensive plan before, and now that's turning out to be, significantly higher. So what we're proposing is either sticking with that plan and letting employees,
Absorb the cost?
absorb the cost, or changing the policy to say, to give us a little bit more leeway to say that instead of doing that, we would base the library's contribution on a designated base plan each year. And that would give us a little bit of flexibility, because some years there might be an outlier where there may be one plan where for one reason or another, there's a really significant decrease, which could increase the cost of 2 employees pretty significantly to stay with the plans that they have, or change or leave it as it is. So what we're proposing is one of 2 options. So this year, if we were to change the policy to say that we could designate a base plan, and this year we would be looking at a plan that's currently the second highest plan, which is in some ways pretty similar to the other plans that we offer, except for the new lowest cost plan. It would ease the burden on employees. It would increase the cost to the library. I think I put the number in my memo here. There will be an increase in the cost to the library one way or the other.
I think like it's on the first page.
It is.
Yeah, so where it says in that paragraph second from the bottom, based on
Right.
current policy. So is it the second highest plan, or is it the second from the lowest plan? I was confused about that.
I'm sorry, it's the second from the lowest. So of the 4 plans, it's the second from the lowest.
Okay. And what is an example of, I see what it would be as a increase for the library's contribution. What does that look like in numbers for staff?
For staff, so if we stay with the current policy of basing it on the lowest, staff will experience about a 7% increase. And in order to achieve that 7% increase, they would have to choose an entirely new plan. If they were to stay with the plan, individual coverage, believe it or not, for the current plan that they're in, increases by 92%.
Right. So I guess what I was trying to get a sense of is, though, what is it in actual dollars? Is it 7% of, $30,000, or it's 7% of,
It's 7% of the employee contribution ranges based or dependent on the plan and the tier of coverage. So it's a range. So for individuals, it's a range of about $600 a year to maybe about $1,500 a year is what they would pay for individual coverage. So individual and employee and spouse are the 2 most frequently chosen levels of coverage. And it would be, it would range from about $120 per, I'm sorry, it's $120 per pay. So around, and I don't have the raw numbers in front of me. I'm sorry, at the moment, I'm just
Okay.
making it up.
So under the proposal, on an annual basis, the library would designate what the base plan would be?
That's
Would-
correct.
would do that every year?
Correct.
What was the 92% increase about? That was if employees stay where they are.
Right. That was if we keep the policy as it is now, that we base the contribution on the least expensive plan that we offer, and they chose to stay in the plan that they're in now, if they've chosen what is currently the lowest cost plan.
Okay, thanks.
And that one I could tell you, Katie, that for the individual coverage, it would go from about $18 per pay, so 18 times 26 is the annual, to about $36 per pay.
Under the current plan?
Correct. Right. And there is an option for them to change to a different plan that rather than that 92%, it would increase the cost by about 7%.
Well, it makes sense to me to do this, to look at it on an annual basis. You know, and that's something we would look at every year then. We could review those numbers.
Correct. The difficulty with, right, and I agree with that. It's a little bit of a, like with any kind of budgeting, there are projections based on the best information that's available at the time. The timing is off for when the renewal happens based on when we're preparing the budget, however.
I believe Katie asked last time whether or not this, like the current anticipated cost to the library is budgeted under the new budget. That's true, right?
It is, correct.
The only other question I had was trying to understand the buyout piece.
Right.
You give the example of what happens with the family. So I guess I just need you to explain that to me, because it doesn't
Sure.
indicate what happens for an individual, and if most of the people are doing an individual plan. I was just wondering how that
Right.
works.
So the buyout is based on a percentage of the family plan period. So that doesn't change. So it's not a different amount for the buyout, whether it's an individual or what kind of coverage they would have purchased. It is for anybody who opts not to participate in library provided insurance. It's the same amount for what the buyout would be.
I see. And so that's just given to them as a credit.
It's actually in cash, and it's like half and half, half at July 1st, half at January 1st.
Okay. And that is based on whatever we determine to be
The
each year
base,
what the base plan is.
the base plan, correct.
Right. Okay. I don't know what you think, Frank, but it doesn't, I mean, the fact that we didn't have this information exactly when Ike is preparing the budget just seems like the nature of what it is. Like, it doesn't seem to me that it's a big deal that we're having to go back and potentially make a change, right?
Right, and it seems like something we may have to do every year. I mean, things are more volatile, less stable than they were before. So giving ourselves that flexibility is probably a real advantage.
Yeah, I think Ike's careful budgeting has made this doable. So I don't have a problem with it. It's within the budget. I think we should go ahead and do it. I don't know what you think. Anybody else thinks about that?
I agree.
I agree.
As do I. But Carol, looks like you have a question.
Yes, I was just wondering, it talks about the coverage not extending to the pediatric piece. So how, if you have a child that's a certain age, when would they, become eligible for, for the coverage under the employee's plan?
So that pediatric piece in the language there actually refers to pediatric dental. So it's not pediatric medical coverage. It's by New York state law, children have to have dental coverage, and so it's built into the family plan or the parent and child plan, and it's a pretty small number that portion of the premium is actually paid entirely by the employee. So it's an additional insurance on top of the medical insurance that is funded completely by the employee.
I would imagine it's very common for dental coverage, right?
It is for people who have children. I mean, there's no such thing really as good dental coverage. That's been my experience. I mean, dental insurance is generally not the best kind of insurance, and so this is just an add-on to the medical insurance for people who have children. And the medical coverage for dependents, Carol, for the medical coverage usually goes up to about age 20 before they age off the plans.
Oh,
Yeah, that's a relatively recent increase in age.
all right, thank you.
You're welcome.
So is the only language that we need to, if we choose to adopt this change, is that the only language that we need to change in the policy?
It is. It's a relatively minor change in the policy language. Yes. So it's the change that says minimum 5% of premium to minimum 5% of premium of a library designated base plan. And then the change from based on least expensive plan to the base plan is typically the least expensive plan. So that we'll use that as our starting.
And what about the buyout program?
And the buyout, the family premium up here it says will be based on the least expensive family premium, and this is based on the family premium of the designated base plan.
Okay,
And
so
then
those are the,
when you would share this with employees, you would just tell them what was considered the base plan for this particular year.
That's correct.
Okay.
And so that would be able to change from year to year, but the way it works, once it's selected, would ostensibly be the same.
It would be the same for that year. Insurance, unfortunately, it changes annually.
Yeah.
So it would be a selection that would have to be made each year. And so both the employee would have to make a selection. And I imagine that it may be the case where when open enrollment comes up, that people may make some changes in their selections based on the cost of the plan, based on who's in the network, based on the coverage. The plans are staying relatively the same, but there are some slight differences in coverage and in cost. The cost is the biggest change.
Right.
all right. So we would need a motion to update the coverage policy to include this language, the minimum 5% premium of the library designated plan. And that the employee minimum, the employee contribution would be 95% of the library designated plan. Well, that's already in the base plan is typically, that's the language you want, what's in red.
Correct.
And as well as the update to the buyout language. So that's on, I guess are those pages numbered? No.
They are. You know what? Let me show you. That's what I saved here while we're looking at these. So they're in a chart here. So it is down here on page 73. So it would be under this where it says employees eligible July 1996 or later. So this is another part of the handbook that we would ask your permission to make an update to. You see this whole chart here starting on page 72, where it says for employees eligible prior to July 1, 1996, this whole section down to the part that says effective July 1, 2015 is now all obsolete. And so we would just ask for your permission to remove that from the handbook.
That's on page 72 and 73.
Page 72 and 73.
Correct. And it's obsolete because that was a phasing in of the employee contribution. Yeah, the changes, and it was based on higher dates. And we have one employee left who was at the earlier eligibility higher date, who is now in the same pool with everybody else.
Okay. Then I'm going to make a motion to the best of my ability that we update the health insurance policy as reflected in today's agenda, the potential update, inserting that, reflecting that it's that the employee must pay a minimum of 5% premium of the library designated plan. And
That's for individual coverage, and then it's 20% for other coverage tiers.
right. And the library will pay 95% premium of that library designated plan. The base plan is typically the least expensive plan, that would option. All other tiers, the employee would pay a minimum of 20% of the premium of the library designated plan. The library would pay 80% of the premium of the library designated plan. Base plan is typically the least expensive plan option. That's new language. We would also update the language referencing the buyout programs for employees who enter or leave the health insurance program, to insert the language that the 20%, this is just for families, I guess.
No, this is for anybody who opts out of library insurance because they have insurance from somewhere else. Our buyout is for anybody, is based on the family.
Right, because that's what I mean. It's a family premium. So that will based on the that buyout will be based on 20%. On 20% will based on the family premium for the designated base plan, which is the important point. The library will be. So I would make a motion that we adopt that language referencing the library designated plan and the other suggested changes in red on the agenda. And as a corollary to that, I would also move that we permit an amendment to the handbook on pages 72 and 73 to update the charts so they're accurate. That's my motion.
This is Katie. I second everything Frank just said.
Thank you. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? That wordy motion carries.
And then do we also need to make a motion, Ike, about the fact that then we are also changing this percentage and library contribution that you specifically outlined, since it's different than what was initially?
No, we're not, because that's based on a formula that's based on the 95 or the
Okay.
80%. So
Okay, good.
and then the next item on the agenda, I don't know that we're prepared to take any action about, but it is related to our requests to display flags at the library and how we might respond to those requests.
So can I ask a couple of questions first?
Certainly.
After reading all these. I meant to drive by today to see where our flag is.
Mhm.
So that's
It-
one question.
Yes, yep. It is on Henry Street. There's a flagpole on the sort of between the Henry Street porch and the bike racks. There's a patio area there.
And do we have just one single flagpole there?
That's correct.
Okay.
Mm.
All right. Thank you for examples of how different.
Yeah, they go from the
Municipalities
very
do that.
short to the very long. So
Yeah, but you quickly see how that would happen.
right.
Yeah.
Right. And I've been doing some research on additional plans. It seems I can't find really many libraries that have plans. And of course, libraries have different potential considerations from municipalities, but I do see more policies for municipalities than I do for any other kind of organization. And they seem to fall into two different categories. Or maybe three categories. So one, like the one that you see on your screen here, is that we just make a decision to fly only the United States flag and maybe the flag of the state of New York. So only official governmental flags. That's one decision that's made. The other seem to be that we do fly other flags, potentially of other nations, municipalities, governmental entities, and commemorative flags like pride flags, Black Lives Matter flags, etc., at particular times. And then they kind of diverge into two different camps. One is we fly flags, could potentially fly flags based on requests from the community, or we potentially fly flags based only at the discretion of the library board or the library administration.
And until this moment in time, it seems like we've had times that you've had a banner or something in the library, right?
Right, we've had banners inside the library and a banner on the outside of the library, but those were essentially advertisements for library services, etc., like summer reading is coming, etc. So different from a flag that's hanging on the same pole or adjacent to the American flag. So, and I will say that we have in the past, when we've had displays or programs about particular countries, we might have had a flag that represents a different country. So if we were doing a program about South Korea, for example, we might have a South Korean flag.
Inside the library, you mean?
Right, inside the library, but not outside as a,
So, yeah, I think that's very different, when if you're doing something in connection with the library's essential mission, like, there's programming going on and you're advertising or flying a flag that relates to that in conjunction with the programming. The problem is similar to the one that we have with the, I don't want to call it a problem, but, when we have a Facebook page, but because we're a governmental entity, we're creating a forum, a government forum for people for speech. And I know we have some kind of policy that we, but with respect to like abusive speech or harassing speech, I think on the Facebook page, But this is kind of different. I mean, we couldn't make decisions about what we allowed to be on the Facebook page based upon content, if we simply disagree with the message that's on the Facebook page. If we do this and we start displaying flags of certain groups, and some, there may be political overtones, some not, some may be religious overtones, some not. We can't really discriminate on ones that that are basis on content. If I guess if there was a Nazi, somebody wanted to fly their Nazi flag, I'm not sure that we could say no, although I suspect most of us would not wish that flag to fly. So, I mean, it seems to me, I'd rather not go down this road, other than like for governmental policies and stuff like that. Because once we get into these speech issues, we open up ourselves. I think we'd have to be very, very careful if we were going to tread into this area about approving certain flags and disapproving others. The fact that we're exercising discretion in this area wouldn't necessarily protect us because of the First Amendment rights involved. Much of what we do, we're protected. We make reasonable decisions because we're just as government officials. But when it comes to First Amendment rights, I think we should be very wary about making a public forum in which we will have very little to say about who gets to fly what. That's just my opinion.
Well, and Frank, I think you kind of hit at this distinction that I see in the policies between opening it up to sort of in the same way we open up meeting rooms to, which does create a forum by honoring public requests, versus flying flags of our own volition. So not taking requests from the public, but taking requests or flying them in the course of our own, which from what I understand, I've read some policy which says specifically that as a governmental entity, if we choose which flags to fly, if it's our choice, then that doesn't make it a public forum. But if we open it up to suggestions and application to members of the public to make requests for which flags we fly, that does make it a public forum.
So what about inside the library? And I'm going to kind of play devil's advocate here. Are we doing programming around Pride Month at the library?
We are, yes, yep. And so we might have those materials as part of an educational or entertainment program as part of our core mission. And is that different from, an outward display that may look like, and this may be something that whatever policy we have may be the same as we say, when we book a meeting room, we don't necessarily endorse the message of the people who are booking the meeting rooms. When we buy library materials, we don't necessarily endorse the message of the book. So we are neutral on these things, but does that mean that then we have a requirement to make it available?
But those aren't public forums in the same way.
Correct. Right.
No, but I guess what I'm driving at is if we have displayed flags and banners and things for other thematic library activities, then would it be consistent with our policy to have a flag like this inside the library?
In relation with the program, I think it would, as program related materials. Yes.
It looks like Jean has a question,
Okay.
and then I do as well. Are you unmuted, Jean?
Yep. Thank you, Katie. I feel like this is an issue trying to create itself, and that it is an act of politicization when we're asked to display or not display, and I think it's a slippery slope. And I feel like it's a distraction from the work we're really doing, which is protecting free speech. And I feel like, we should just fly the US flag and or maybe the New York State flag, but don't even get into this as a controversy, because we've got enough we're doing that's already going to be challenged. That's really truly a serious attack on the work that we're called to do.
I agree with Jean. I think that it is a slippery slope. And I think we'd have a really hard time, as much as we might have a lot of sympathy and toward this particular issue, we're going to have a really hard time if somebody comes along with an issue that we really don't feel that affinity for, and they insist that they have the right to display. I just think it'll be a mess.
Well, I had two things that then I was wondering about. One was in terms of, it also means basically we have to buy and create another space for another flagpole, right? It means we have to invest as a library to create a space for people to hang this flag, because right now we only have, because all of these really indicate that there's real regulations around how the American flag is then to be displayed versus any of these other flags.
Right.
So I'm not sure why we would invest money
Right.
in that. But my question that Heather was also bringing up is, in the same way, can people request programming around topics? Like the question of, here's a question about the Pride flag, is there Pride programming? Can anyone come forward into the library with any of their ideas or a cause they're interested in politically or otherwise, and ask the library, do we open ourselves up that in general, we are now in a place that we are expected to accommodate across the board any requests?
Right.
You know what I mean?
Right. So there is, yes, there is a mechanism for people to suggest programs to us, and we try to program to the broadest audience where there's going to be the broadest appeal. So we would not, as a library, program in any way that's going to promote hate speech or that's going to be denigrating to particular members of of our community. Anything like that, we would not do that. Where there might be a place to do that, and what we do sometimes suggest, is when people come forward with something that they want to present that's not actually the library presenting, we would say, here's a way for you to request meeting room space. And as long as you represent a nonprofit organization with significant representation within our community, you are likely eligible to book a meeting room space. And in that way, it's not a presentation of the library, but it is a use of our space that is equally available to anybody representing a group with a presence here in our community.
Okay.
And we did have, and this has changed over the years. There was initially, and not just us, but libraries everywhere at a certain point had a sort of a prohibition on the use of the meeting rooms for political or religious purposes, because those are the two things that are the most polarizing, and where there's the most potential controversy. So partisan, political, or religious uses. We no longer have that prohibition because it's been determined to be unconstitutional for groups who represent partisan political organizations or various religious groups. They are on the same footing as any other nonprofit organization in our community to request meeting room space, which is essentially on a first come, first served basis.
Right. Okay.
Yes, Jean.
Is that written anywhere in our policies?
It is, yes. Yep. We have a very long policy about meeting room use and guidelines for use of the rooms. And I'll send a link. It's on our website, but I'll send the link out to everybody afterwards. And people make use of it. So, so we regularly not so much recently, since we're just getting back into having the meeting rooms open, but we have had Democratic Socialists of Saratoga Springs and the Saratoga Springs Tea Party, both on our list of approved organizations to book meeting rooms. So it really is across the spectrum. And Baha'i Faith Group as a religious example, along with everybody else in between, lots of homeowners associations, etc. So there is a forum for that, which is what I think might be, and Frank, you can correct me legally where if we were to open up a flagpole for community groups to apply to display a flag, that might be analogous to the way the meeting rooms work.
Your question is, I'm sorry, your question is if we put up a separate flagpole and entertain applications for people to put up their flags?
Right, it might be treated in the same way. We might use the same criteria that we use for meeting room bookings potentially.
I think it would be different. It's a different kind of, because it's a different kind of forum we're talking about.
Yeah, I do
I think
too.
it's more akin to the Facebook forum. That's why I brought that up. You've created a space for people to come and declare their message and speak. You're with a meeting room, you're just providing space, and you're providing that space on an equal basis to everyone, and who's not for profit, and you're not in any way endorsing. But when you decide as a board, as a library, that you're going to hang this flag and maybe not hang that flag, then you're getting into kind of a First Amendment problems about why you're making those choices, because you've created this space for everyone to speak, and you're deciding who gets to speak. So, I mean, I think it's a bad place to go, but I do think you're right, Ike, about, if it's, and I guess this is our current thing, we can display things that are certainly related to the programming that we're doing. That seems important, and that's part of our programming, but creating a separate space for people to speak and endorse, and like in this case, I'm sure we would all say that's a great idea, but there are probably other people who would want a flag who maybe we wouldn't think it was such a great idea, and we get into issues.
Right. It's interesting because I wasn't thinking that we would invest in another flagpole, that if we went down this road, we would fly it on the existing flagpole underneath the existing flag. Because that seems to be the protocol, is that the American flag is always on top and then the other flag comes below. But I did read one municipal policy, I think Arroyo Grande, California, which specifically says we're not buying any new flagpoles. So this policy doesn't require us to buy flags.
Did your research? Does the city of Saratoga Springs have a policy?
I haven't found one, and I did ask Heather if she was aware of one. I haven't found one.
No, and I don't have like a policy manual. Like we get personnel policies and I have the finance policies, but I don't know that there's a comprehensive binder someplace. I mean, maybe in the HR office, but that usually when you bring something up like that, if there is a policy, the person you're communicating with will know, that somebody who's there for a long time, who works in the department that's in charge of that kind of stuff, and none of them have mentioned it. And I took a look around on our website or our internal drives and stuff and didn't find anything specific to this.
I do know that the banners, those little flag kinds of things that hang down Broadway, that those people can submit, and they give you the parameters of the size and whatever, and you pay as an organization.
Yes.
Right.
So that's a different piece. I also want to say though, that whether or not you choose to like you were saying, if you chose to do some kind of programming, I think you gave the example of South Korea, whether you're going to hang this South Korea flag, that's also your prerogative of what you're doing for the programming. So you're also, there's no requirement that just because you're providing pride programming. Bye, Jean. That you.
Oh, is that a question or is that about?
Okay.
No, I'm gonna ask a question.
Okay.
Oh,
I just saw your note in chat.
Oh, that was Jen Ferris, I think had to go.
Oh, Jen Ferris,
It's
okay. Gee, I saw the J.E.
Okay.
It still doesn't require us to have to do that. I
Correct.
mean, that seems like the piece that,
The distinction, right?
yeah. All right, sorry, Jean. Here I'm saying goodbye to you on.
Hit the road, Jack. First of all, I was thinking, we are owned and run by the city school district.
No,
Oh.
so the city school district is our service area and our taxing authority, meaning that they,
Okay.
the public, so we are an independent entity of them. So you all are our governing body.
But our tax bill shows up on your school tax bill. So
That's correct, because
that's the confusion.
yeah, I think in the state of New York, it's illegal for library districts to collect taxes. So somebody else has to collect taxes on behalf of library districts. And it's
Okay.
usually school districts or municipalities are the major two.
Yeah, so I was just wondering if there was anything applicable there. And I wanted to say, well, I'm on the board of the Social Justice Center in Albany, and one of our very progressive groups wanted to fund a workshop in our building about how to own and shoot a gun. And our social justice community went nuts, and like we were being cut out of everybody's everything because it looked like we were being pro-gun. And so we had to have, thank goodness, our allies in the community were able to make the point that this was being offered by a program that was a member of the Social Justice Center, that it was not the Social Justice Center itself that was promoting or saying, but that our job is to allow these other voices to speak.
Right. And that is something that we have encountered on a very rare occasion with groups using the meeting room, that people have made the mistake that a group having a meeting within the meeting room was doing so on behalf of the library rather than on behalf of themselves, representing
Right.
themselves. Right.
Which is why it's so important to have it very clearly in our materials that we may not support the content being presented in the program.
Right.
Um,
And I think that would be harder to do on a flagpole, right? If we're
Right.
flying ours next to a flag, it would be very hard to, if it's especially on one, to divorce one message from the other, right? As not the message of the library.
Yeah, and how many and how, so I guess the question is anyone wanting to pursue this, or is everybody, I haven't heard anybody who's supporting this.
Right. So, or do we want to have a policy, because it seems like we may need which our policy is to fly the American flag.
yes.
It's something that's similar to the one that was presented here by was it the Bay County Library?
Bay County Library System, something simple. We could
Right.
do something simple like that. So we have a policy. So that would be something that you could point to when you get this
Mhm.
When we get the
kind of
request.
request.
Right.
And the ways it, depending on who the group is, and if it's a particular time of year that we have programming related, it can be,
Other ways we
to-
can
Right,
celebrate.
right.
responded to in that way.
Right. So between programming and then public use of the space by nonprofit organizations, there might be opportunities. Right.
So can we table that and have something written up for the next meeting, or?
We can, and in response to the request.
Frank will do?
What?
And so in response to the request that we have outstanding now, we just say that given the absence of a policy, we'll have to respectfully decline.
Yes. Yeah. An interesting question, Mr.
All
Pulver.
right.
Yeah, it was a very good discussion, I think.
It was, thank you.
It's a very interesting and difficult issue.
Yeah,
Right.
Yeah.
Especially when, as Jean says, like at the core of our mission are these issues of free speech.
Absolutely, that's
Yeah.
the hard part.
Right. So. All right.
good.
Okay, well, I
Is
think
there anything
that
else?
was the end of the agenda.
Well, if that's the end of the agenda, it's the end of the meeting. I guess we're going to adjourn.
Did we want to acknowledge, Frank, I did, it wasn't on the agenda here, but that there was one comment from a staff member who asked us to take, her point of view into consideration when we were looking at the health insurance discussion.
Oh, yeah. I also notified her that I had sent around her message,
All
that
right.
shared her message with the board. Yes, so that,
All
we
right.
did receive correspondence regarding the healthcare issue, which we sent around to the board, and I'm sure everyone had a chance to look at. All right, so good night. We're going to adjourn until our next June meeting, I guess, right, Ike?
Correct, right.
Bring us in
Thank
between.
you.
All right, thank you all.
Thanks,
for-
everybody.
Everybody,
Thank
thanks.
you. Have a good night.
Good night.
Do.